Hey guys, what's going on? My name's Tyler McNabb, and this is my 400EX. So, if you watched my last video of the vlog from my last race or whatever, I told you everything went well, nothing really broke or anything. However, I did forget that my clutch was actually beginning to slip. I don't know, you might have been able to hear it in the race video, but when I get up into the higher gears like 4th and 5th, you could tell that it was definitely starting to slip a little bit. So yeah, I decided I need to go ahead and replace it because I've had the quad about 2 years now and I've never put a clutch in it, so it's definitely due for one. So I ended up getting a Barnett clutch system for this. It comes with everything you need. Got the fibers, steel plates, and the springs. So overall, I've heard good things about Barnett clutches, so figured I'd give them a try. A lot of times, I think I've used EBC in the past, but my local guy couldn't get them. They were out of stock and back ordered, so figured I'd try out a Barnett system, and so we'll slap this thing in and test it out. So let's get to work. So the first thing we're going to get to is I'm going to go ahead and take the skid plate off. You normally don't have to do any of this, but that thing's going to leak oil when it comes out of there. So I'm going to take the skid plate off, drain the oil tank, drain the engine of the oil. If you didn't want to have to drain the oil, you could prop this thing up on its side and change it then, but this thing's due for an oil change anyway, so I'm going to go ahead, take the skid plate off, drain all the oil, and then we'll get started on the clutch. Okay, so got all the oil drained out. So next thing we need to do is we need to get this clutch cover off. So I'm actually going to take the oil filter cover off and take it out since I'm doing an oil change, but that's not normally necessary. You will have to take these lines off as well as the clutch bracket. Yours is going to be a little different because I've got this hydraulic clutch, so but it's pretty much the same deal. Just take off the 2 bolts and the bracket will slide out. And then you'll also need to take this brake pedal off because it gets in the way of the clutch cover coming off. So let's get it off. So we got the side case off, the clutch case off, and I actually got really lucky. So as you can see, the gasket is actually still on there, and here is side case, and none of the gasket came off on this edge, and it all stayed on the engine. So I got pretty lucky. I'm actually just going to end up reusing this gasket. If it would have peeled off, I definitely would have replaced it with the gasket I've got, but since it's still on there, I'll just dry it off, make sure it's good and dry on the bottom, and then I won't have to deal with scraping that off or anything, because that's always the worst part about this job. But so I got that. So I guess something else you're going to want to do when you're doing a clutch job like this is go ahead and soak your fibers in oil. It just depends on the clutch. This one actually only recommended like 1 to 3 minutes of soaking in oil before installing, but I went ahead and threw them in there. I'll probably sit in there for 10-15 minutes before we throw them in the quad. But yeah, some of them people say overnight, couple hours. Yeah, it just depends, but whatever works. I mean, you just want to get them a little bit of oil on them, make sure they're good and soaked before you throw them in. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take these 5 bolts off to get this outer hub off the clutch, and then once we do that, all the fibers and steels and everything will slide out, and we'll be ready to put the new one in. So got the fibers out, got all that out. Another thing I like to do while you're in here is, if you can see, it's kind of hard. There we go. That bolt right there, if you pop that out, that's where the oil screen is. So I'm going to pop that out real quick, and since this is a relatively new build, there might have some metal chunks or some little metal shavings in from where the engine broke in. So while I'm in here, I might as well clean that out. So inspected that oil screen. Yeah, like I figured, there was just a couple little metal shavings on the bottom of it, just from where the engine had broke in and everything. So nothing too big to be concerned about. You know, if you pulled that out and there was big chunks or bearing material or something like that in there, then you'd probably be concerned. But since this thing it's probably only got maybe 10 hours on it, even with the race. So I'm not too concerned. This is just its second oil change since breaking in, so I'm not too concerned about it. But so I pulled the old fibers out, and as you can see, they're really dark. I'm not sure, yeah, if it comes across compared to the new ones. Look how light they are. These are really dark. That is because they've gotten really hot and they're really worn down. So yep, this thing was definitely due, and I'm not sure if any of these are warped or anything. Not that you can really tell, but you know, this thing was definitely due for a clutch. So now we can get ready to get these fibers, and we've got some new clutch springs as well. And then we got the steel plates here, so let's get those guys in. I guess there is one more thing you definitely want to check out when you're doing this, is you want to look at your clutch basket, and you can see kind of the contact points that the clutch pack comes into contact with the clutch basket when it's engaging and disengaging. And like if you feel that and it's really wavy, or if you feel a lot of kind of jumpiness in your clutch, and it's like really hard to pull, then that means it's time for a new clutch basket. But this one isn't too bad. Plus, with my hydraulic clutch, even if it was really waved out, like I wouldn't really notice it, just because it's all hydraulic, and there's no clutch cable, so I wouldn't even feel it even if it were worn down. But as of right now, it's in pretty good shape, so we may get a clutch basket in the future, but right now it's still good to go. So now we can go about getting the fibers in. Okay, so on the 400EX, and I think this is pretty much how it is on most quads, your first one is always going to be a fiber. So you're going to take your fiber, slide that in, and then you're just going to alternate between disc and fiber. And so one thing I figured out that you want to do is, usually when you feel these steels, one side of this is going to be smooth and one side is going to be more sharp. It doesn't matter which way you do it, but you just want to make sure that you do it the same way. So if I have the sharp side going in, I want all of them to be in. So I'm going to do that for all of them. And then once you get to the last one, I've seen a lot of the quads and stuff I've seen aren't this same way, but this one, if you look at the basket where most of these fiber grooves have been sliding in the long groove, there's a short groove, and that's where the last fiber is gonna slide in. So it's actually a little bit offset from the others. So it'll slide in like that, and that's all you got to do for the fibers and the disc. Now we got to put our clutch, the outer hub, back on. So first thing you need to do is slide your little plunger in. It slides in there, and then make sure your bearing is still in there. Make sure that's still in there. You wouldn't want that to fall out. I guess that's another thing you want to check, is make sure it's good and not binding or anything. So go ahead and slide that in. Got that on there. And then take our new clutch springs, take your bolt, start those. And I'm going to run these down with an impact, but I'm not going until it actually impacts. I'm actually just going down until it touches, and then I'll tighten with a ratchet. You can torque these if you want, but usually what I do is I just kind of get them good and tight. You don't want to go so tight to where you're possibly stripping those out, because that would not be fun. But just tight enough to where they're not gonna come loose on you. There we go. So we got the clutch back together. So now all we got to do is slap our case back on there. So you want to make sure this thing is back this way and push down in, because there's a little groove in there that's going to hook into this plunger, and if you have this pulled forward, the case won't go on. So you want to make sure this is probably pointing backwards towards the back of the quad, and then you'll be able to tell if it's hooked on right when you put the case on. If you pull this forward, it'll suck the case in. That's how you know you've got it on right and everything. Another thing you want to check, make sure your dowel pins are in, and then we should be able to put this case back on. And yep, if I pull the case off, you can see if I have this gap here and then I pull this forward, it sucks it in. That's how I know it's good to go. So now all I need to do is go through, put all my bolts back in, we'll tighten those up, and it'll pretty much be done. Once again, I'm using the impact, but I'm not actually going to tighten these down. I'm just running them down flush. So once again, you can, if you really want to, you can torque these down to about 7 foot-pounds, I think is what the manual recommends. But what I do instead is I tighten them. I put my hand on the center of the 1/4 inch and pretty much just go as tight as I can. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to slide these dowels back in. I'm going to give them just a once over, make sure there's nothing huge debris wise on them. That way you don't develop a leak. So I'm going to slide that one back in. This one's a little dirty, so I'm just going to wipe it off with a rag. And get the major stuff off of it. And then an easy way to remember which one goes where is the top one, so the one going up to the oil cooler goes on top. And the bottom one, which is coming out of the oil tank, goes on the bottom. So that makes it pretty straightforward. Okay, so I got the case on, and then I hooked up the slave cylinder for the hydraulic clutch. And I was having some issues that I had to go through and mess with, and it turns out it's just that old clutch was so worn out that I had to end up putting some washers on the front of this hydraulic clutch, because since this is all custom, it's not actually made for the 400EX. You can't order a kit for it. It's a custom bracket and everything made for this slave cylinder for the hydraulic clutch. There's no adjustment built into it like a normal 400EX clutch, where it's got a little set screw that you can loosen or tighten to tighten the cable or whatever. So I had to end up doing that. I think I got it figured out now. So next thing to do is I'm just gonna fill this thing back up with oil, start it, put it in gear, and make sure it's not killing itself, because there is a chance that this slave cylinders may be worn out. When I owned this quad previously, we actually did have to end up putting a new slave cylinder on it, but yeah, so who knows, it might have worn out and we might need to get a new one of those. But I'm gonna put some oil back in it, see if it works. actually not with the clutch. I think it has to do with the slave cylinder. Yeah, so honestly, I'm probably gonna have to try to mess with it. I'll probably try bleeding it, and if not, that slave cylinder is pretty old, so we may need to get a replacement for that. I don't think it's anything with the clutch, because there's not really much that could go wrong there. So yeah, I guess I'll look into this, try bleeding the slave cylinder, and see if we can get this figured out. Hey guys, so it's been about a week since I was last working on the quad, messing with the clutch. As you can probably tell by the background, it looks a lot different than the last video, but did some reorganizing and stuff, had some school stuff going on, so didn't really have time to mess with the clutch, but ended up messing with it over the weekend, and it turned out that it didn't have anything to do with the new clutch. Well, I guess it did, but it was actually the hydraulic clutch that I was having issues with. And so that thing probably hadn't, the oil in it probably hadn't been changed in who knows how long. It probably honestly hadn't been changed since I last owned it, so that could have been 5 or 6 years. So it was super dirty, so I went ahead, drained all the fluid out of it and put all new fluid in it and re-bled it. And then I also so as you can see here, this first nut, it is there, it's what's actually holding it, and then the second nut right there, it is actually working as a spacer, because my old clutch was so worn that just with how the clutch arm and everything works, the hydraulic cylinder was fine, but then when I put the new one in, it actually, in that same position, the hydraulic cylinder was running out of travel, so it was actually hitting the back of the hydraulic cylinder. So that's why I ended up having to space it out and give it more room to move. And so did that, and then I went and test rode it over the weekend for like half an hour or so just to make sure that was the problem, and didn't have any issues. So also I'll add that when I did do some test riding and stuff, I could really tell how worn out the other clutch was, because this thing pulls a lot harder, especially in the higher gears. You put it in 4th, even 5th gear and pin it, and it really pulls compared to what my other one was. So who knows how long it's actually been slipping and how long it's been bad. But yeah, I can tell a huge difference already just from a little bit of test riding. So hopefully that'll help with racing and stuff, get me a lot better grip and that kind of thing. So that's gonna pretty much conclude my clutch video. Other than that, I think this thing is pretty much ready to go. I'm gonna do some more jetting stuff to it. As it's getting warmer, I can tell it's starting to richen up, so I'm gonna try to lean it out on the pilot probably before my next race. But other than that, hope you enjoyed watching the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.